Crises of Humanity, as seen from the stratosphere, by Kouken Okadome. Crises of humanity do not exist in the shortage of energy, but in the inflating residual pollution by mass consumption. 1980. Growth beyond the limits of the Earth. Further growth will degrade the biosphere, becoming a residual contamination. Species is depleted, and the Earth's ice began to melt. The gap between the rich and the poor causes all the evil. Introduction of this book. An airline captain's messages for the Earth's environment issues that he had witnessed from the stratosphere since 1960s. These are the sincere prayer for happiness to the succeeding generations. After 1980s, excessive mass consumption that has surpassed the Earth's capacity could not be purified and illuminated as residual pollution. Global warming is one of the phenomena of residual pollution caused by carbon dioxide. As a result, the Earth's ice began to melt tangibly, and then the sea level rising. At around the same time, a number of living species started to disappear. Compared with 100,000 years transformation of the Earth's history, such tangible change of the Earth as the ice melting in the past several decades denotes an instantaneous, explosive transformation of the Earth. These phenomena of melting ice and decreasing living species are evidence that prove the Earth has limitation. See Chapter 5, Ecological Footprint. Nowadays, according to conservation ecologists, more than 100 species are disappearing every day, and the biosphere is dashing toward extinction. The biosphere is indeed in an emergency. The more economy grows, the more residual pollution increases, and the costs to manage the pollution increase exponentially. Thus, the world economy and social structures are approaching collapse. Even with the 3% of economic growth, human consumption would double in 23 years. If you might be in doubt about the contents of this book, please refer to the website 1992 World Scientists' Warning to Humanity. The gap between the rich and the poor is the root of all evil. The society allowing freedom of human greed has induced the destruction of the Earth's environment and the world conflicts. These 3 points are interlocked as contemporary social issues. Hope is in the change to hyper-progressive tax system to resolve the gap society that could be realized by young generation taking advantage of the system of democracy in which each person has one vote. Uprise working poor. Author's basic view. Circulation and solidarity in life. Nature is a form of circulation. Our happiness lies in circulation of water, the greens, and all living creatures. Anything good for life looks beautiful. Why do people climb the high mountains? Solidarity in life might be the answer. There is an instinct in life forms to try to expand the biosphere in solidarity from the bottom of the sea to the highest mountain. May humanity never forget that all forms of life started from the first single life, thriving in mutual solidarity. See Chapter 11. Mrs. Sadako Ogata, the former High Commissioner for Refugees at the United Nations, recommends this book as worth reading warning to the public. Prologue. I have already written a book entitled Days, Departure for a Long Journey, in which I express my thoughts on the life of the generations who will come after me. I was thinking that I should devote the days left to me to putting the finishing touches on my life spent together with my wife. The book in which I sketched my days with my wife in a rural village was selected as suggested reading by the Japan Library Association. It made me feel so grateful for my book to be selected in this way before I depart. I was very happy, imagining how my thoughts would touch the hearts of many readers. But the other fact that made me even more excited was my wife, who is suffering from Alzheimer's disease, is reading the book almost every minute when she has time. I originally thought that she was reading only the easier to understand parts, but in reality, she was following every single word in the sections referring to the gap between the rich and the poor and environmental issues. I wondered, what attracted her? She answered my query by saying that she was very happy when she was reading the book, although the contents disappeared from her memory soon after. Wherever she goes, even in our home, she brings the book. I thought I had no more regrets and could simply let the days pass by before the departure for a long journey. Having said so, I had a concern that had been sticking in the back of my mind. My concern was the fact that I had not proactively written about the things which I had wanted to appeal to others about most. That is to say, my sense of danger about the biosphere on the Earth that I had viewed from the stratosphere as a pilot, and the immense gap between the rich and the poor I had witnessed in the countries to which I flew. The reason why I hesitated to mention these issues was a fatalistic feeling I had regarding the future that I had possessed since 1992, when I had high expectations that ended in disappointment over the 1992 Earth Environment Summit held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. No more than one or a few decades remain before the chance to avert the threats we now confront will be lost, and the prospects for humanity immeasurably diminished. This is an excerpt from the 1992 World Scientists' Warning to Humanity, signed by more than 1,600 of the world's leading scientists, including almost all of the Nobel laureates in natural sciences, who felt a sense of crisis at the outcome of the Rio summit. If the Nobel Prize has any academic authority, the contents of this warning, submitted only a few months after the Rio summit, must contain grave scientific evidence. However, this warning was virtually ignored. No valid actions were taken thereafter, and more than 2 decades passed, but all of a sudden, in 2013, an astonishing announcement was delivered by one of the global warming prevention conferences, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, hereafter referred to as the IPCC, stating that the air temperature would rise almost 5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. In the Earth's history, this temperature is identical to that of 35 million years ago, when there was no ice on the Earth. Carbon dioxide density was as high as approximately 450 parts per million, and the sea level was higher than the current level by more than 70 meters. I personally dislike exaggerated expressions with regard to risk both in my vocation of maneuvering jetliners and mountain climbing. However, a catastrophic future, which I had had a vague anxiety about, finally became glaringly real through concrete figures. However, global warming is one of the phenomena of the deteriorating living environment which human beings are currently facing. The rising sea level is not the only crisis facing the biosphere, including us. The ultimate cause of the crisis is the fact that human beings' mass consumption exceeded the threshold of the Earth's sustainable substance capacity around 1980, according to literature. As though attesting this fact, the number of living species started becoming annihilated at an abnormal pace from around 1980. While the Biosphere has experienced the verge of total extinction 5 times, once every 100 million years, the current astonishingly high rate of reduction is several hundred times as fast as the last 5 times. If this pace continues, all living creatures would disappear in approximately 3 centuries. Reflecting back, the density of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere had exceeded 340 parts per million at around 1980, and mountainous glaciers had already started melting. In the Earth's history, there was no ice in the northern hemisphere when the density of carbon dioxide was above approximately 340 parts per million. At the moment, the ice on the northern hemisphere is dashing toward annihilation, and not only mountainous glaciers, but also the ice on the North Pole, Greenland, and even Antarctica is beginning to melt. It was not a coincidence that 3 events, mass consumption limit, drastic reduction in the number of living species, and start of ice thawing in the northern hemisphere, started at almost the same time. This is evidence that proves the Earth has limitations. After 1980, the portion of the consumption that had exceeded the Earth's limitations has been deteriorating the biosphere as residual pollution. The more the economy grows, the more residual pollution and costs to manage that pollution increase at an exponential pace. Those costs curtail other really necessary budgets, and the world economy and social structures are approaching collapse. Global warming is also a phenomenon mainly caused by the residual carbon dioxide pollution that has been emitted, exceeding the Earth's purification capacity. Should human beings keep aspiring to the current level of economic growth, the consumption would double after 23 years. However, the one and only Earth cannot physically support this consumption. Considering this fact, it is expected that the human society would be thrown into confusion within 2 decades at the most. The crisis of the collapse of human society does not exist in the shortage of energy, but in the inflating residual pollution. What's worse is the fact that conflicts among nations never cease. In case those conflicts escalate, the collapse of the economic social structure gets closer at an accelerated pace. While I was waiting for my departure day, since I heard the figure of approximately 5 degrees Celsius announced at the IPCC, my heart has become knotted by that fact, and my thoughts became my prayers for the generation of life following after us who would be left in the deteriorated environment. Having said so, the days left for my wife and myself are extremely limited. I hesitantly inquired to her about my thoughts on a new book, and she replied that she would be glad if my thoughts could remain in a book. Thus I made up my mind to write this manuscript. Then, as I was in the midst of writing my manuscript toward the end of 2015, it was announced that the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, hereafter known as COP21, comprised of many countries around the world, had come to a consensus and entered into an agreement to cooperate to take action on global warming. Looking back now, I recall that 40 years ago, Then UN Secretary General U Thant recognized the threat that was fast approaching the living environment based on information from various sources, and warned that if the countries of the world do not unite in cooperation to take action within 10 years, it will become impossible to control the danger to the living environment. The content of the Paris Agreement, formed at COP21, will take action in response to that warning. But in effect, what this means is that it took regrettably a precious 40 more years for human beings to just form a cooperative framework. I hope that our actions will be in time. I have been viewing the Earth from the stratosphere for a long time. While gazing at the stars during night flights, I worried about the future lives which are destined to dwell on the polluted Earth. The things I have been continuously thinking about over time have accumulated in my notebooks and as leaves in my heart. Since I encountered Silent Spring, a book that alerts human beings, I've read a number of books on life and the environment. However, the majority of scientific research and scientists' pet theories are based on uncertified elements in the Earth's history and contain too many different hypotheses, figures, ages, and interpretations. I was obliged to maintain great patience and endurance to peruse those books, as I needed to sift valid theories from the mixture of valid or baseless theories, including derisive antitheses. Only a person who is extremely interested in the subject could have completed this process without tossing it aside. The people to whom I want to convey my thoughts are those who, although interested in environmental issues, spend days with a vague anxiety. Thus I wrote this book, not as a scientific abstract, but a sort of essay on my thoughts that I want them to use as their daily guidance. My intention was not to be too fussy and avoid overly referring to scientific literature. I repeated and repeated what I thought was important, consciously. This is from my thought that readers can memorize my thoughts without flipping pages. In order for us non-professionals in the domain to comprehend the crisis of the living environment conceptually, I tried to show important outlines and approximated figures so that the readers can roughly grasp the flow of the facts. Regardless of my efforts, if you find parts that are not easy to read, you could skip those parts, but I encourage you to read through to the end. I have repetitively reread and rewritten this book, as I want as many people as possible to comprehend the contents, praying for the happiness of the lives of the succeeding generations. I hope readers could refer to this book whenever they encounter environmental issues on TV and in other media. The gist consists of 3 points, that is to say, the future of global warming, a prophecy that the human society would collapse under the global environment that would metamorphose into totally different ones unless human beings, in solidarity, suppress mass consumption to within the Earth's limitations, and the fact that the biosphere has already entered the stage of annihilation. In the background of these 3 points, there exists a situation where 3 issues are interlocked. That is to say, environmental issues, gap between the rich and the poor, and the world peace. The gap between the rich and the poor, in particular, has become the Pandora's box in human society, breeding religious and international conflicts, terrorism, refugees, and domestic issues, through generating envy and hostility in people's minds. Countermeasures were postponed, and now it's too late for us to take any measures that could work in a fully valid manner. We are now at a stage where we must determine whether or not we can pass on even a little bit less deteriorated biosphere to life in the succeeding generations. I added a chapter in which I stated my basic thoughts as I confront the universe, nature, and life. This chapter is based on my previous book, Day's Departure for a Long Journey, to which I added my thoughts developed thereafter. If you read both books and become my soulmate, I would be extremely grateful. Now I am writing this book, and my wife is reading The Day's Departure for a Long Journey beside me. My wife and I have spent many difficult days endeavoring to have heart-to-heart communication. In other words, we are good friends that cannot be parted, but our hearts had long been strangers. However, now she is talking to me while I am writing. Sorry for the past 50 years. I will make your heart happier by staying beside you. This is a change in her heart status that could be regarded as a conversion. She is talking about her happiness spending her last days with me in the place we moved to from a metropolis, a country village still surrounded by beautiful nature. She says, I've never experienced such happiness before. Regardless of her memory-related disease, her heart seems to me the healthiest it's ever been now. Although she is in a state saying, "What's that?" gazing at the moon, her heart is still, even in this condition, evolving. Her previously unused brain cells have no doubt reacted to the days in a country village blessed with abundant pure water and greenery. We encourage each other, endeavoring to become the very best couple in the world before the time when she becomes incapable of recognizing me. Yet her posture as she strives to take a walk with difficulty is a heartbreaking sight. I will leave this book for my children, my grandchild, and those people who are important to me, as well as entrust it with all my prayers to the lives that will come in the following generations. I will stand by my wife and return to the days where I'll be waiting for the departure for a long journey. Contents. Chapter 1. Blue Planet Viewed from Stratosphere and its Biological Environment. Chapter 2. Outline of the crisis the Earth is facing. Chapter 3. Global Warming and the Survival of the Ice. Chapter 4. Biosphere Dashing Toward Extinction. Chapter 5. The Earth's Limited Capacity and What We Risk if We Disregard Scientists' Warnings. Chapter 6. Can we become happier with a growing GDP? Chapter 7. Thoughts on energy issues. Chapter 8. The increasing gap between the rich and the poor is the root of all evil. Chapter 9. Free trade and environment. Chapter 10. Hope is in the change of the tax system. The party of progressive taxation, a party of the young generation. Chapter 11. Solidarity in life. Why do people climb the high mountains? Chapter 12. My Cosmic View. Addendum. References. Special thanks. About the author. May the beautiful earth with water and green and full of life be handed over to the generations to come.